Very warm welcome to you all, and just to say a couple of words quickly about the Early Career Researchers Network for Wales, which we've established here from the Learning Society of Wales. We've long wanted to make sure that we can add to the work we already do through our fellowship of more than 550 experts across all disciplines and all institutions who have a connection to Wales. And we want to ensure that we offer good opportunities to early career researchers as well, however you define that. And so last summer we began the process of organising a network. That network has grown to have about 550 members so far from a very wide range of disciplines, and people from PhD students through to senior lecturers. So it's quite a wide definition of early career researcher. Very keen to provide these opportunities open to all for people to engage with the issues of the day and be really and find opportunities for professional development as researchers. So that is the context in which we're organising today's session. Delighted that 3 of our fellows are here with us today, and I'm going to pass over to one of them, Professor Jenny Kitzinger, who is your chair for the day. Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Martin. Welcome. I was delighted to be asked to chair this session. I'm passionate about public engagement and impact, as are our speakers, and as I'm sure many of you are, which is why you're here. As early career researchers, you are working in a world that has different pressures and opportunities than when I was an early career researcher. But I hope that the increasing recognition of the importance of public engagement is something that can enhance all our research. And I imagine we'll be talking across the full spectrum today, whether it's developing dialogue to help form research, or using research findings to engage in public engagement, or whether it's creating social change through the work we do. And I'm particularly pleased that we have speakers here today, both from the humanities and the sciences. So I think there'll be some interesting cross-fertilization there. And please do feel free to it's really nice already to see some of you are saying hello in the chat session. It's great seeing the gallery, although I've just switched back to speaker view, but seeing 158 faces. Some of you are blank spots, but if you do ask a question, it's great if you feel happy to turn on your camera when you do ask questions. The organization of the day is that I'll be asking each of our speakers to talk for 15 minutes. I then have chair's privilege of leading a discussion with them for a bit longer, and then we'll go to an open Q&A session where I'll ask people to type their questions, and then I'll ask people if they're willing to actually turn on their cameras and speak their questions. If they're too shy, we have someone willing to read out your question for you. So without further ado, we have 2 speakers, Professor Nathan Abrams, who's directed impact and engagement in the College of Arts, Humanities and Business at Bangor University. And we have Professor Lynne Boddy, who delights in the title of a decomposition ecologist, and she's from the School of Biosciences at Cardiff University. So without further ado, I'll invite our first speaker. Nathan, would you like to take the floor, please?
Pnawn da, diolch Jenny. Good afternoon, thank you Jenny, and thank you everybody for tuning in. And I will show you a presentation in a few seconds. I just want to preface with a few opening remarks. So my job internally at Bangor University is to motivate other people to do engagement leading to impact. And it's my impression, and I'm happy to have a discussion about this, that whilst most of my colleagues are quite happy to do research and don't need any motivation to do it, when it comes to engagement and impact leading to impact, they're perhaps a bit more reluctant. So we're already sort of starting off in a situation where we have to try and motivate colleagues to do something, particularly if it's viewed in REF terms, in the Research Excellence Framework terms, in a British context. But that there's so many of you here is encouraging that the future means that someone who does my job in the future might have less of a harsh task, motivating colleagues to engage in engagement. The second thing I'm going to say, and I'm sorry for the use of the metaphors, because I can't think of a better one, but I think when it comes to engagement, there's kind of soft, what we might call soft and hard engagement. The hard engagement is where it's kind of directly related to change. You might be policy focused, you might be working in medical sciences or in agriculture, or where you know that something you're working on is very likely to have a change, an impact. In the humanities disciplines, arts humanities I represent, it's less obvious where that might come from and how we create an impact through languages, literatures, cultures, film, music, that sort of thing. And that's what I'm going to focus on today, is where the less obvious disciplines might be able to have an impact. And I'm going to use myself as a case study. Forgive me for that. Let me get my Twitter feed now. There we go. So hopefully that's all clear to everybody. Is that a yes? I get a nod, Jenny?
Can you enlarge it slightly? Because the
Yeah,
print is quite small for my old eyes, but I may not need to read the print. Yeah, that's
it will enlarge as I go through.
Excellent.
Okay, so this very short presentation is how to make an impact globally in a soft discipline. So I'm a historian by training, although I now have been teaching film studies for over 14 years. 14 years at Bangor previously. And I don't work on film policy. I don't look at statistics. I don't look at that sort of thing. So I don't look at the industry as such. So in terms of trying to make an influence, trying to make an impact, one might think, well, where does that come from? But I'll explain. So since 2012, I was working intensively on this book. There's a plug, out in paperback, which is a kind of a biographical study. Autobiographical, it's a Freudian slip. Study of Stanley Kubrick as a New York Jewish intellectual, and it delved extensively into his ethnicity, what I call his ethics, and his archives. And when that kind of reached publication, around publication stage, I did extensive social media engagement. I can't recommend this enough. So that, I created an account for the book. I went on all the fan sites on Facebook. I advertised the book. I argued about the book. Amongst Kubrick fans, this is a controversial thesis, which I could explain another time. And I debated civilly with people on Facebook and Twitter, and I did this a lot over the sort of months preceding publication, after publication. And I think that's really important, actually. I mean, not only cynically speaking does it get readers for our work, potentially more buyers of the book, at the same time it will lead to hidden benefits, which I'll go on to in a second. Now, what happened as a result of this extensive social media engagement and arguing my case was I got a message out of the blue from one Facebook user, and it turned out that his father was a composer who I hope you're all familiar with Stanley Kubrick. I didn't need to go into a lecture, but I'd say probably America's post-premier, or one of premier post-war directors, who made such classics as The Shining, Clockwork Orange, 2001. Anyway, a composer he had worked with back in the 50s, from 1951 through 1957. His son got in touch with me and he said, look, I got these scripts in mind. My dad gave me some scripts. Do you think they're worth anything? And so my job was to sort of look at this and authenticate it. And he said, well, I got one of Paths of Glory. And I'm like, oh, that's not so interesting. We know about that. And he said, well, I got this one here. I don't know if you can read the text. It's Burning Secret. This is a film that Kubrick worked on in 1956, but never got made. And then just disappeared. And we knew he'd written a script, but we didn't know anything more about it. It'd basically been lost since 1956. So this was very exciting. So my job was to verify this and authenticate it, and which I did. And that takes me to the next stage. So the next stage is, meanwhile, once my book had been published, a journalist had got in touch with me. And this journalist, you might know, I mean, I can send the link, but or I can click on the story. She specializes in kind of discovery stories. And the most recent one I read, Dalia Alberg, was the one about Stonehenge being Welsh. She did the British write-up, I think, in the Guardian for that. And she said, have you got anything revelatory? Now, in my original book, I was like, well, I don't have anything for you. It's not that kind of book. It's a reevaluation. She wanted something sort of gossipy. But then when this screenplay dropped into my lap, I was like, aha, I have this. And she said, this is fantastic. This is exactly what I want. So, and I believe this was on the weekend of Donald Trump's visit. Do you remember him? To the UK. And let's see, let's click on the link. Let's see if this will work. She published this story. Sorry, I keep trying to subscribe to the Guardian, but they just won't let me. She published this story in the Observer on Sunday, the 15th of July, 2018, and did well to get it in. It was about page 4 of the physical paper because, as I said, Donald Trump was visiting. And so this got published. I was very pleased with this. This is a story, and then there's me. That's the key bit. And you know, this went out Sunday morning, and next thing I then go out for a walk. For those of you familiar with North Wales, I went to Llanberis, and suddenly my phone started going off, and suddenly I was getting requests from various media to talk to them, and this included their first interview was El País in Spain. So I had a bizarre situation where I'm at the National Slate Museum in Llanberis, talking to El País about Stanley Kubrick whilst trying to look after my kids. Kind of a bit like now, really. And this suddenly went viral and got picked up by loads of media outlets, and led to more engagement opportunities. So not only were there reprints of the original article and then rewrites and translations into various languages, they got picked up by the print and broadcast media. And you know, so BBC interviewed me, and the Canadian Broadcasting Company and Australian Broadcasting Company, and it sort of went on. And I mean, the one I was really chuffed with, because I'm an academic, was the interview on Radio 4's Today with John Humphreys when he was working on the program. So what this did was not only help to generate, I mean, of course, it's very self-serving in a way, I'll accept that, generate publicity about myself, but and about my work. It also led to, I hope, wider engagement with my work and a sort of wider awareness of Stanley Kubrick, and a different perspective that I was providing. The different perspective I was providing was considering him as a Jewish director and what role his ethnicity played and impacted on his films. But kind of what I want to bring it round to is simply to say that through this extensive engagement, which started off through social media and then led to a journalist getting in touch with me, is that you start off with your research, you engage with the public to get them involved in the research that you're doing. And then they might bring insights to you. And often, you know, I find in a way that actually the fans that I engage with often have interesting insights that relate to what I'm doing that I hadn't thought of. So it helps me think through what I'm doing. But in this instance, they brought a whole new kind of artifact to light that no one had seen since 1956. So this one. So in a sense, cynically speaking, through, not only do I recommend engagement in and of its own sake for the reasons that I've said, is that it led to discovery and research discovery. And I probably would not have found this myself, not that, you know, it wouldn't have been presented to me in any other way. It's not in an archive as yet. It's not in the traditional routes that an academic would find. So to sort of bring us full circle, I now have a brand new find to exploit for further publications and hopefully for future impact and engagement. The one disappointing thing is I also, I mean, it's a little bit of a humble brag, but I'll do it anyway, is that I started getting phone calls from studios and people who alleged to represent certain people who couldn't be named, whose names begin with Stephen, asking if they could see a copy of the screenplay. It was tremendously exciting. I thought I was going to make my fortune and that this screenplay would be adapted, and as a finder I'd get a fee, and of course they'd need an academic expert to on Kubrick to advise on the resulting adaptation. None of that happened. That's why I'm still here. Because the problem is that until we work out who owns the copyright, it can't be exploited. But in terms of thinking through engagement to impact, should somewhere down the road this ever get adapted, and then one can think of the economic impact of that in terms of jobs, ticket sales, that sort of thing, then in a sense I've played a small part in that. So just to sum up, I do the engagement because I enjoy it. I mean, I did an impact case study for Ref 2014 based on me traveling around talking to people around Europe. So that was fantastic. So it's in and of itself enjoyable and personally rewarding. Secondly, again, it does highlight the research you're doing and draw attention to it. Thirdly, it can help it in terms of different viewpoints, non-academic viewpoints. I mean, it depends on the nature of the research you're doing, but the non-academic viewpoints. And fourthly, it can lead to discovery, which then benefits your research again. And if that discovery might also have other impacts down the road. So I'll stop there and happy to, it's probably shorter than my allotted time, never a bad thing. And I'm happy to, if I've been too rushed and brief, to explain anything further afterwards. So diolch am wrando, thank you for listening. And I'll mute myself now.
Thank you so much, Nathan. And I think it's very timely that we've started actually with a discussion of the power of social media as public engagement. And that was a fascinating account of both how it's public engagement, but it cycles back to bring in this serendipitous but amazing discovery that then in turn generated mass media attention and more potential. You will see, everybody, we now have a hashtag for discussion today, for using Twitter and social media ourselves to comment on and engage with some of the debates here. The hashtag is #public engagement and then LSW for the Learned Society of Wales. So it's #public engagement LSW. So do feel free to send your own tweet about public engagement if you're on Twitter. And I'm sure we'll come back to the power of these sources. I think, Lynne, I don't think you are on social media, but let me now pass on to Professor Lynne Boddy.
Let me share my screen. So I am actually on social media, but I'm not called Lynne Boddy.
I couldn't find you. What are you? I'm
called @FungusProf. And so the only reason that I do things that's on Twitter is that I got onto Twitter simply for outreach. And so the views are not on anything other than fungi, really. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. Actually, I feel a bit diffident about giving this presentation because I decided that I tell you the sorts of things which I'd done in a vaguely chronological sequence, or a few of the things, but it might come over a little bit egotistical, but I hope that it might give some people some ideas. So I'm a fungal biologist, so I research on fungi and I teach ecology. So I research on these things that you can see here. And try to work out how their networks work, how they fight each other, how their communities develop, how climate change is affecting fungi across Europe, and how fungi rot the centers of old trees. And of course, like other scientists, I report in the peer-reviewed scientific literature and speak at scientific conferences and occasionally write what I'd like to think of as authoritative books, or edit books on the subject, or indeed write undergraduate textbooks. And this is all well and good for the scientific community, but of course we need something rather different when we try to engage the general public. And very early on in my career, I realized that I really wanted to start to talk to people and to get people to understand about fungi, because all the questions that people were asking me were things like, will it kill me if I eat it? Or why bother with these things? They only rot our homes or kill our crops. And actually those things are true. And that's one of the reasons why we need to work on fungi. But of course, also, our planet wouldn't exist in the form that it does without fungi, because plants are absolutely dependent on them. And I wanted to get this message across. So very early on, I started to talk to people about this. And when you're starting your career, obviously people don't know you, and so perhaps you have to go out and put yourself about a bit. And so I started talking to schools, to junior schools and high schools. And the British Mycological Society, that's the society that is for fungi in Britain, used to have what's called the BMS Roadshow, British Mycological Society Roadshow. And they used to go around to all sorts of places, agricultural shows and that sort of thing. So I'd help there, and I'd offer talks for gardening clubs and Natural History Society and the Women's Institute and all these sorts of things. And people gradually started asking as well. And in fact, there are a multitude of opportunities. For example, in Biology Week at the National Museum of Wales, we normally do something. People often have outside activities where they want talkers, and then there's things like soapbox science. One of my very favorite things as an outreach opportunity was at the Chelsea Flower Show. And we actually put on a garden and a display in 2008, and we won a silver gilt medal that year. And I really wanted to come back and do this again. We actually had there's a huge footfall. Thousands and thousands of people go to Chelsea, and it was the most exhausting thing that I have ever done in my whole life, going in every day and talking almost non-stop from 9 till beyond 5 every day about fungi. I could never have thought that I would find it a struggle, but it jolly well was. Anyway, we came back in 2009 and we won the gold medal. But I should say I'm a scientist, and this lady here is a very keen amateur mycologist, but an artist. And so she was great at putting everything together. And we liaised actually with the chief of gardens at the University of Sheffield and put together a garden there. So this is a brilliant way to get to outreach. You can do some rather strange different things. I had a student once in 2009, you may remember that in Trafalgar Square, the fourth plinth doesn't have a statue or anything on it, and Anthony Gormley put forward these art ideas where you could have an hour to do whatever you wanted on the fourth plinth. My student Martha Crockett, you can see here, put her name forward, and she was actually selected in the draw. And she said she didn't know what she was going to do. She said she might talk about knitting. I said, oh, don't talk about knitting, tell the world about fungi. Well, her time slot was 4 o'clock in the morning, but you'd be amazed at how many people there are in Trafalgar Square at 4 o'clock. And of course, it's not 4 o'clock in the morning around the rest of the world. The rest of the world was watching. So this is another great but different opportunity. Then in 2010, the International Mycological Congress was held in Edinburgh, and I was part of the organising committee. And the chief organiser went to the Royal Botanic Gardens and said, could we have a small display on fungi during the conference? And they said no, and of course we were all disappointed. They said, but what you can do is you can have a huge display. We're just opening our new education centre, and you could be the first exhibit. And they helped us put together this huge display on fungi, and that was a great opportunity. And at the same time, we put together a book which I had the great joy of co-authoring half of it and editing the other half. But that's when I really learned that I need to write in a very different way. I write scientific English, but this was a book for the general public. And I thought at this stage, I should be in the School of Journalism here. There's an awful lot I need to know. But hopefully I've learned a bit more. I learned masses whilst writing this and masses since. And we had fungus days at the Royal Botanic Gardens for children and for adults and all sorts of things. But of course, they couldn't keep the display forever and they wanted to get rid of it. They were just going to trash it, really. It would be too expensive to store. And I asked the National Botanic Garden of Wales whether they might take it, and they were very keen to do so. And they kindly asked me to open it when they set up the display there. And that was another great chance to talk, which I did. But afterwards, I asked the people who'd been invited to the opening if they had any ideas how we could promote fungi to the public. And somebody said, well, is there an International Fungus Day? And I said, no. And they said, well, you should have one. I said, well, how do we get one? And they said, well, you just have one. And I thought, well, that sounds all well and good. But in fact, what we did was we had Wales Fungus Day with huge help from the Botanic Gardens and across Wales. And it was a huge success. There's one of my postgrads talking there. And from there, we built on this, the great success, and we started off UK Fungus Day. This was run by a very enthusiastic person, Ali Ashby, across the whole of the UK, and the illustrations here from Cambridge. And then, of course, from some of these things, other opportunities arose. We had great footfall at the UK Fungus Day and the Botanic Gardens, thousands of people, but you can get to millions of people if you're lucky enough to get on in the newspapers, magazines, TV, radio, and video. And I've been very lucky to have some small slots on various programs. Actually, one of the quite fun ones was something I did a long time ago, where we did a radio program, and the start of it was broadcast from the inside of this dead tree. That was a bit surreal. And then more recently, we've managed to have rather larger slots. So whole programs, for example, the Life Scientific and the In Our Time program on fungi. And most recently, in the Curious Cases of Rutherford and Fry, we had a program on the good and bad in fungi. And then, of course, there are documentary films. And you can not only get then to the millions of people in the UK, but perhaps around the world too. And I was lucky enough to participate in two of these documentaries, Fantastic Fungi and The Kingdom, which both of which won quite a lot of prizes, which was lovely for the producers and directors, who did a wonderful job. And of course, there's the possibility of doing videos and interviews and podcasts. And although I've sort of been always a little bit diffident and waited to be asked, nowadays there's no need to wait to be asked. You can make your own videos and put them up on YouTube. If nobody's asking you, then put yourself forward, put your subject forward and do it yourself. But of course, lots of people don't speak scientific English. People view things in different ways, and the arts are so important. And in 2017 or 2016, I think it was, a lady called Ruth Mariner approached me and said that she wanted to write an opera about fungi. And I thought, what a great idea. This is another way to get to people. And one of my students at the time, Emma Gill-Martin, spent a long time with Ruth, making sure that what Ruth's opera said was right. And this brought in all sorts of different people from different venues. But carrying on this arts link, I've done quite a lot of collaboration with artists. And artists indeed are becoming very interested in fungi. But this penultimate slide, I think, shows my most recent book, which will be coming out. I too can advertise books, will be coming out probably next week, actually. And this book is actually written for, well, originally it was written for arborists, so people who look after trees. And there was one particular arborist who 6 or 7 years ago just nagged and nagged and nagged me, saying, please, please write this book for us. We need it. And in the end, I got so fed up with being nagged, I said, okay, I will. And actually, I'm so glad I did, because it was great fun. And this started off just being a book for arborists, but now really it's a book for anybody who's interested in fungi and trees. It's written for the general public, really. But I knew how I wanted to illustrate this book on the front cover, but of course it was impossible to find a picture, not least because some of the things I wanted to illustrate were underground. And you can see that this wonderful artist, Mariana Heilman, has indicated the below ground networks of fungal hyphae, the dead fungi on the trees and on the woods. She summed up that story so wonderfully. So it's important that science and art interlink, because we've got so much to give, I think, to each other. And I just like finally to finish up with my most favorite piece of outreach so far, which again will be coming very soon. So this year during lockdown, a publisher's asked me, would I be interested in writing a book for children? And I most absolutely was. So this is a book for 7 to 9-year-olds, because I think that a young inquiring mind, if you've got the interest of a child, you've got the interest of that person forever. And so this is a book which will be coming soon. So on that note, I'll stop, and thank you so much for your patience and for listening.
Thank you so much, Lynne. We've already got chat on the side about everyone wants to hear that fungus opera, the idea of the singing mould. I think we'll all be queuing up for tickets for that. And tell me more about Judi Dench? I have Judi Dench envy, seeing you sitting with her. What was that event?
That was one of my most exciting things ever, because I'm a great fan of Judi Dench, and she did a television program on trees a few years ago. It was shown on several occasions just before Christmas. So again, millions of people watched this, and there was a little part at the end, 10 minutes on fungi. So I did get to meet Dame Judi, and I was a little trepidatious about going because she's such a great hero, and I thought, what happens if she isn't a very nice person or something like that? And it turns out that she is absolutely exactly how you'd imagine. She is the most lovely lady and so interested in trees and the natural world. And it was a really, really wonderful experience.
So I'm going to take chair's privilege to ask a few questions of my own. And while I do that, please can I encourage people to type in some questions using the chat function. So I will then scroll through and come back to the questions. And also I want to kind of ask Lynne and Nathan to think about if they have any questions for each other as well. So just using chair's privilege, I guess the first thing I want to ask, and maybe it's a reflection on how I'm feeling, how do you balance enthusiasm and exhaustion in managing this impact activity that's often, it's rather on top of the day job, isn't it? I think you'll both agree. How do you cope with that and give of yourself with your obvious passion for your subjects and excitement, but also know when to draw the line?
I don't think I've learned the answer to that, Jenny. If anybody can tell me the answer, please do. I'm always exhausted, totally exhausted at the end of it. But it's just so fulfilling. It's just something that has to be done, and I love it, and I get much more, well, as much out of it as I put into it. I think that's it, like everything in life, isn't it? You get out what you put in, and you know, as well as passing on the important messages that you feel that you have to pass on, it's a great joy. And as Nathan said already, I think you learn a huge amount from these these encounters, because people often ask you questions like things perhaps which you've always assumed you knew the answer to, or never even questioned. And I think it sends you up all sorts of different alleyways, and I think it's so exciting and rewarding, and I don't know how you keep the balance. I know that I spend probably far too long doing outreach, trying to do a 9 to 5 full days job, and then doing all this is quite hard, but so rewarding.
Nathan, how about you? Given you have to motivate others to do this as well in your role.
I mean, I think, you know, for those of us working in institutions, there has to be a culture change that this shouldn't be considered on top of the job, but as equal part of the job as everything else we do. So that's the struggle we have, is trying to say that, look, out of your research, engagement should be part of your research. And even if you're, say, not on a research contract, then engagement should be part of that as well. Because, you know, I mean, simply put, my philosophy would be, by and large, publicly funded. So we do have some kind of role to explain what we're doing in a public way, and it's not dumbing down. And even if it is, so what? We have a duty and a role to explain what we do. And I think we should have that ethos as opposed to the kind of cynical, ref-driven ethos of, well, we have to do it for impact. I mean, and just to answer the second bit of the question, many parts of the job are exhausting. Staring at a screen in meetings for 5 hours a day is exhausting. But no disrespect to staring at one now. But some parts of the job are just far more enjoyable than others. Teaching's exhausting. Admin is particularly exhausting with what reward, unless you like admin. So I just think, the enjoyment, I mean, what Lynne's described sounds fantastic. And, who wouldn't want to do that? I mean, and especially fungus. I mean, people are mad for mushrooms. Whenever there's a mushroom day up here, you'll get 50, 60, 100 people turning up. Don't know if we get that for Kubrick, unfortunately. It should be a Kubrick day. I've lost my train of thought. I'm going off on one. But it's rewarding in the terms of, before I used to spend a lot of time going, well, I still do, talking to different audiences. It's just that opportunity of meeting different people and travel. It's very rewarding, obviously. So some things are exhausting, but some things are exhausting and pleasurable. It's the way I'd answer that one. Whereas some things are just exhausting, right?
Yeah, and I guess, yes, you're reminding me of the variety. Sometimes you can enjoy something and then you use a different muscle, I suppose. It's a bit like when I weight train. There's only so many curls I can do, and then I can do a few squats, and then I need to move something else, and maybe impact and engagement is in there. I guess one of my concerns is that early career researchers, I mean, we're all of a certain age. We grew up at a time when there was maybe less range of things we were expected to do. And now we're meant to be able to edit our own films and upload them into the internet and do impact and engagement and research and admin and teaching. And I do see that there's great potential and support for one's impact activity now in a way that I wish I'd had when I was an early career researcher. But I also worry about the pressures on ECRs and the lack of recognition of all those different tasks. I don't know if either of you have a reflection on that for how you mentor or how you work as leaders within your organizations.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Jenny. I think that I don't feel that there really has been any recognition really at a university level with the outreach that I've done over the years. And I really hope that is going to change. And I think as Nathan pointed out earlier, I think it is changing because quite rightly, we have a moral responsibility to tell the world what we've been doing with the money, with people's money effectively that we've been spending. So I do hope that's changing, but I don't know how you balance all of these things which you're now expected to do. So I was just doing all of these things on top of what I was expected to do, but now you're expected to do it as well. And I don't know how you balance things. You've got to be very cunning and very, very careful, I think, and not to burn yourself out. And I guess it's different for every single person, but I'm not sure that I'm a very good person to offer advice. And if somebody could offer me the advice, please do. It's not too late for me to take it.
I think it probably is. I think you're in too deep.
Shall I come in? I think it's interesting. I don't know if we still use the terms of sort of when we talk about digital natives, digital immigrants. If I'm out, please correct me if those are the incorrect terms. I've noticed since doing my PhD that the range of tasks imposed on a PhD student now within 3 years is huge. So, it's unfortunate in a way, but I think a younger generation have grown up doing PhDs with a range of expectations that we just weren't expected to have. I mean, you just did your thesis back in the day. Now it's some teaching, right, to prove you could do that. But now there's all kinds of requirements, particularly if you're, say, UKRI funded. And I don't think ECRs and colleagues of any other ranking there's a distinction in the multitude of tasks they're expected to do. You know, I think the tasks just get different. You know, as a full prof, it's, you know, I might not have to do the same tasks as an ECR, but I'd still have to do a lot of tasks. And I think the distinction I'm trying to say is that it's, with engagement, we've had to learn to do it. Whereas I think now for ECRs, there's maybe more of an awareness. It's, you know, they're more sort of native to it, that it's part of what being an academic is. So we've had to come to it late, hence the resistance. So to me, a ECR cohort is actually more open to this, I would suggest, than my more senior colleagues. I mean, I'll give you an example. When we're all told we had to do grants, one of my now retired colleagues said, "I'm not a fundraiser. I've never written a grant application in my life," right? It's just not said now. And I think that's a distinction. And I can only imagine what said person might have said about engagement. One other thing that I did notice is there was a certain period, you know, because I come from a history background, when media history on the TV was becoming more popular, that you could almost be a bit cynical, pick your topic, thinking, well, this has a BBC documentary. You know, to me, there's a culture change there. Whereas, you know, 20 years ago, you did your thesis and wanted to get it published with a good university press and get a job. Now it's that plus, well, I want to do the TV as well. So some people, I think, are already more savvy than we ever were, because it wasn't expected of us then. So to me, I have more faith in the future generation, in a sense, than trying to convert some of my colleagues who were allowed to become set in their ways, if that's fair.
Okay, I can see lots and lots of questions piling up. So rather than keep using my chair's privilege, I am going to formally thank the speakers. I also want to thank Tia for organising this event, which I can see is going to be very vibrant and already has been very interesting. And I'm going to turn to some of the questions. One came through privately, so I'm going to read it out before I lose it. Are there jobs that only entail public engagement in scientific research without the hands-on research being concurrently required? So are there jobs that only entail public engagement in scientific research without hands-on research being required at the same time?
I think that there are, yes. I think lots of departments around the country now would have a public engagement person. If they're a big science department, big science school, might have either a full-time or a part-time public engagement person. Probably quite often somebody who would go into schools. But yes, there are. And usually the people who take up those positions are people who have done PhDs and done research already. But quite often there are positions like that.
I often end up finding I tussle with my public engagement officers, because they're, you know, obviously they know all the tricks of the trade and the great images you should have and the strong statements, and I'm always kind of pulling back. So it's a bit of a dialogue and a creative tension, I'd say, with the public engagement officers at Cardiff. And in the chat commentary, someone's saying Cardiff University will have a post like that for each college. So yeah, if you want to go just into public engagement, that is a possible career path. Okay, I'm going to turn to some of the other questions. So Dawn Pickering, do you want to ask your question if you're ready to turn on your audio and camera? Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. It was when Nathan was speaking, and he made quite a lot of emphasis about exploiting his research, and the participants in my PhD are disabled children, and the last thing I want to do is exploit them when I'm disseminating my findings. So I'm not quite sure about this tension between promoting your own interests and yet advocating for the interests of your research participants. So I wondered if Nathan wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, exploitation is possibly the wrong term to use in this context, because I take your point. When I mean exploitation, I'd see how it's got the dual meaning, and I didn't mean it in the sense you're you're suggesting. I don't see, in a sense, a tension between advocating for the people that you're researching and promoting your research, because by promoting your research, you're advocating for them, right? And I wasn't in any way, and I apologize if it came across that way. I was talking about exploitation of a screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
How can we turn that screenplay into something other than that screenplay? I wasn't referring to exploitation of human beings, and so what I meant was the promotion of your research should hopefully benefit the people with whom you're working, your stakeholders.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wasn't in any way saying exploit them. And I hope in the promotion of my research, I haven't exploited anybody. I mean, I got zero financial gain from this script, and the person who showed it to me promised me a bottle of whiskey, which never arrived. So I can hold my hands up there. I hope that answers your question. I apologise if yeah, I'd see that.
It does answer it. Thank you. I think it was just I suppose the anxiety I feel going forward, because I've only just got through my Viva, so I haven't really published yet. But it's like, how do I promote what I found? And yet it's not me who's going to get the recognition. I want to promote the needs of the disabled children. And it's a tension I feel going forwards. How do I get that balance between promoting their interests and needs rather than exploiting, my name to get my findings known by other people? But I'm sorry if I misinterpreted the way you said it. It was just that tension I felt.
I don't feel that I've exploited my name, because I don't think my name was particularly out there. I'm not Rutherford. I'm thinking of the other one, the physics guy. One of those famous people. Who's the guy on the telly?
Stephen Hawkins?
No, the D-Ream guy. He does the infinite monkey cage. His name's gone right out of my head. The guy at Manchester is on TV and does the science.
Brian Cox.
Yes, I'm not Brian Cox exploiting my name power to get. Thank you there. To get my name power into places that it wouldn't. I can see that one. It's more your name inevitably, if you're dealing with a public issue, will become associated with it anyway, right? Like Jenny's presentation, the two are going to be interconnected. That doesn't mean that you're using anyone, because otherwise, how else on earth do you push it? Is it going to get out there? Because you're the one most passionate about it, right? And if you want to make change for the better, if you're not going to do it, no one else is going to do it. So in a sense, I would say you have a responsibility.
Yeah, I guess it's treading that line, that tightrope, really, to know how I'm going to do that the most sensitive way.
Dawn, I have a lot of sympathy, because I work similarly. Well, I work with families with severely brain injured relatives, and I'm very cognizant of, nothing about us without us, the whole disability rights discourse around this. I can't even ask consent from the vegetative patient whether I can do research on their family experiences. And it is a very delicate line whether, for example, you support a family to go forward, appear on the media without you, or with you, or just you without them. And of course, the media love a human interest story. So they're always quite keen on literally exploiting your research subjects. I routinely get approached by journalists saying, can you give me a patient? No, I can't give you a patient or acute disabled child or whatever they're looking for. So I think you're really right to raise the ethical issues, and those of us who work around, not with fungus or script, but with living human beings, perhaps face those challenges more than others. And I'd happily chat about it with you as you take your PhD forward. And congratulations, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for answering.
There was a question about methods. Joseph Earl, I think. Do you want to turn on your camera and ask your question?
Yeah, of course. You can hear me all right. Yeah, I'm sure you can hear me okay. Great. So my question was particularly directed at Lynne, I think, because she demonstrated a whole range of methods that she's used across her work. But I wanted to ask, what sort of public engagement methods have you found the most valuable for conveying your research and generating conversation? And then conversely, are there any methods that you would have avoided in retrospect, you know, for being too time consuming or for some other reason? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I don't think that there's necessarily been one thing which has been better than another. And I think that I've really adopted the approach that if anybody in the media, for example, is interested in the work, then I would certainly make an effort to go to the media, because you can get to so many people through the media. You know, it's wonderful going into schools or just giving little talks in the evening to 20 or 30 people. That's a great joy. But if you want to get to lots of people, then you do it through the newspapers or the television or the radio. I can't say that I've regretted any of the approaches that I've taken. I think that live TV is a bit worrying, I must say, and I'm not sure that I'd be very keen on doing live TV again. I did do one program once, and I found that very nerve-wracking. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's horses for courses, and often you just have to take what you can get. You know, if opportunity comes, then take that opportunity, grasp it with both hands and go for it. But if opportunities are not presenting themselves to you, and probably they won't do to start with, they didn't to me, then I think that you have to go out and be preemptive yourself, and, you know, make those opportunities.
Great, thanks very much.
Nathan, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Live Welsh radio when you've learnt Welsh. But as we're in Wales, and they never stick to the questions that the researcher puts to you.
That is absolutely true. I've had some scary radio things. Yeah. Live programming is very worrying, very worrying.
But and you pick up your skills though, don't you, with different media, and radio is a lot easier than TV, and not live is better than live.
Yes.
The trick I was told was just do what a politician does, just answer with your prepared script anyway, whatever they ask you.
I've never got over the experience of, it was a big news day and my research was relevant to a news story. So I'd been on Welsh media in the morning, then I was on a train to London, taking calls, briefing journalists. And then I ran to the BBC studios and I thought it was radio, and I rushed in and the makeup woman said to me, "Oh my God, your face." And I said, "It's okay, it's radio news." And she said, no, it's TV. And she grabbed a scarf and she said, "Well, this will distract from your face." And she wrapped a really colourful scarf around me and then pushed me into the news studio. And I just kind of sat there pouring with sweat. And having to answer questions, and I've decided that time management is a crucial thing on a hot news day if your research happens to be newsworthy. Okay, I'm going to go to Francesca, whose hand is up, and then I'll after that come to a couple of questions in the chat that are about collaboration with artists, collaboration with children's book authors, which might go well together. Francesca.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. They were really, really nice. Well, my question is related to the basically how to conceive and think, like let's say regarding the birth of the engagement activity, because I have a problem. I don't know how many have the same problem. When you're driven by enthusiasm, you start to think and build and build and build and build something huge because you want to put more, and then basically it results in a completely mess that fall entirely. So I was basically interested in knowing, when actually designing a public engagement activity, would be better, especially at the beginning, start to focus on a simple concept and try to see how we can, get the public on that simple thing and stop. We learn from that, and then maybe we can try to build a more wide program, or if, based on your experience, you have a different approach for that.
I agree entirely with that. Simple is best. I have two messages that I try to get across to people, really. Well, one message, but two parts of it. The ecosystems of planet Earth would not work without fungi, because all plants, or almost all plants, need fungi to feed them from their roots. It's fungi that take up water and nutrients and feed those to the plants, and they get sugars from the plant in return. And the second thing is, that fungi are the main decomposers, the main rotters. If it wasn't for fungi, we'd be up to our armpits in dead stuff. They break it down and recycle those nutrients. And very often, those are the two main messages I want to get across. And I keep it at that and just try to build things or build illustrations around those two simple messages. Keep it simple.
Thanks.
I was going to add, it depends what your, there are many different routes for engagement. I've just highlighted one. So it depends what you're working on and who you're aiming at. I mean, one of the easiest ways to try and get your message out there is through parliamentary inquiries, for example, which is a very, isn't time consuming. It ties exactly on what Lynne was saying, and could open up routes for you. Yep. And we don't advertise this enough, I think, amongst the arts and humanities as a route, because often policymakers and parliamentarians have a far greater range of interest than just the headlines of the economy, the environment, science, STEM. You'd be amazed. So, one can also target opportunities potentially in a way that aren't that massively time consuming, and preparing, simple messages. If you're aiming at a policymaker, I think the advice is prepare it as if you were talking to a 14-year-old, which exactly is what Lynne's saying. It should be, it's probably the advice across the board, right? But then it also depends who your audience is. So I think to answer the question, it depends who you're aiming it at. Then you design kind of what your approach is.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm aiming for schools at the minute. So I'm trying to get the scientific message regarding fluids across schools. So that's what complex fluids, the way they call it, like blood and polymers and others. So, okay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think Maria may have had to go. If you're still here, do turn on your camera, Maria, and ask your question. If not, I'll ask it for you. Yeah. So the question was, and it was particularly to Lynne, though Nathan, feel free to add if you have anything on this. Have the interactions with artists changed or informed your research in any way? Or how has it changed and informed their practice? So that whole collaboration with artists.
Yes, I think from what the artists tell me that it really has changed their practice very much, because they started thinkers in networking and ramifying here and there. So I think it has changed artist practice, although probably it'd be better to speak to them. It certainly changed my way of thinking because of the questions that they've asked me, and things which to me I thought were intuitively obvious. They're clearly not intuitively obvious to everybody. And it's really made me stop and try to explain things in very different ways. And I think I think in different ways too now, but I'm not sure that I could actually put my finger on what that is. One of the main things that I learned from artists, I think, was that there are different languages out there. I'm afraid I only speak English, and I speak a very narrow form of English, and that's scientific English. And we know that there are lots of other languages around the world, but lots of people think in other ways. I think I've mentioned this before. I think there are lots of people who think in a more pictorial or a musical sort of form. And I think that it's important that we try to reach those people in these different sorts of ways. And it's all to do with diversity and inclusion. So I can't really put my fingers on what has changed, but I'm sure that lots of things have changed with me, and changes for the better.
Nathan, do you want to come in on that at all? I don't know how much. I mean, you work with film all the time, don't you? But are there ever other formats of engaged and stimulated your thinking or your collaborators?
Well, I mean, Yeah, I mean, I work in lots of different things. I mean, at the moment, I'm working in maps. So this is another whole thing I could have told you about, which is mapping local history. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interaction where the research you provide changes their view of it, and then their approach of what you've provided them with helps you to think about things differently. So, or you both bring different things to something. You know, so that you can, I won't use the term exploit, but that you can maximize your research in a form that perhaps, and get it out there that you hadn't thought of when you started doing it, because it's not what you do. So I recommend that as well. I mean, if you can link up with other people. So why reinvent the wheel? I think, Jenny, one of your questions, do we all have to learn to edit and upload videos? No, I haven't. I teach film history as opposed to film studies. The students know more than me on the technical side. So work with people who can do that for you or want to. And colleagues have successfully done that. And those practitioners, no doubt, will learn something, right, from that collaboration. I think.
Yeah, we all know the saying, a picture paints 1,000 words, but that is so true. You know, I think that in just one page, the outside cover of this book that I've got coming out soon, to me, that artist has done a phenomenal job. She's told the whole story of my book in just one picture, and I just think that's remarkable. And I'm really going to collaborate with so many more artists of all sorts of types, I think.
Now, this is obviously generating a lot of discussion on the chat. So let me go to Julia, who asked about the children's book you're obviously intrigued by. You want to ask your question, Julia?
Hi, yes. Thanks so much. I've really enjoyed both presentations. I was just intrigued, really. It's expanding on one of the other questions about how you got those skills of being able to write so in that fashion, as you say, Lynn, so distinctive from our normal sort of scientific writing. I just wondered if it just came to you naturally, or whether you had some sort of tutoring or somebody else wrote the text for you.
No, it didn't come naturally to me. Well, it might have done if 50 or 60 years ago, perhaps. I don't know. But now I think I write as a scientist. But I think it was when I was involved with this book for the Royal Botanic Garden of Edinburgh that I suddenly realized that I can't write in the way that I do write if I want to get my message across to the general public. And I think I gradually started to realize that you can write in much simpler ways and say this and tell your story very much more clearly. So I started then. And the other person who was editing this book with me, from the parts that I wrote, he scribbled on lots of bits in the same way as I tend to on students' work, and showed me that, you know, this isn't clear to just ordinary people who don't know. And I think I gradually started to learn then. So if when that book had come out or before that, I don't think I would have been any good at all at writing this children's book. Now, this children's book is the hardest thing that I have ever written in my whole life, because the book tells the story about the whole of kingdom fungi on what and all the wonderful things that fungi do. Lots of it is artwork. So what I had to do to write this book is I had to get lots of, I had to work out effectively the story I wanted to tell. Each page is there's a double page which is covered in beautiful artwork and some text, and each page had to tell a whole story. So I got together lots of images, photographs that I'd taken or friends had taken, to show the artist what I wanted in each part. And I wrote the story. Now, the really hard part of this comes with the fact that the most amount of text in any little part of the story that you were allowed to have was 35 words. Very often it was 20 words, sometimes even less than that. Now, writing your story in 35 words, I mean, if you do Twitter, I think I learned a lot from Twitter, to be honest, with the limited number of characters you can use. That was so hard. The hardest thing, to tell this story simply, but without dumbing it down to not to be true. So I think that everything that I've written there is true in the sense that we know it as at the moment. Truth might be different tomorrow or whatever. But it was just the hardest thing I've done, but equally well, the most rewarding thing. And the editor lady was very, very patient with me, because they come back with the artwork and these bits of text, and sometimes she's edited and she didn't think they were clear. And I'd send it back again and say, no, that's not right. You've edited wrong. That doesn't mean the right thing now. So it was very, very hard, but wonderfully rewarding. I hope that it's okay and that children aged 7 to 9 will be able to understand it. But it's something that I've only learned over these last 10 or so years. I've gradually got there. It was very, very hard. And you might think, oh, that's easy. This is a book that's only 60 pages long. This shouldn't take any time at all. Well, I was working on this at weekends, every weekend since about June, since you know, sometime early in lockdown, to do this. These tiny, tiny bits of text, very, very hard. Great fun, wonderful, so worthwhile. But
thank you. That's why I asked, because I knew everyone says children's books are the hardest to write because of the shortage of words.
Absolutely, absolutely. I tried things out on my granddaughter. Did she know what this word meant and that word? She's about 6. I thought it's quite good. So.
Jenny, can I just make a general point?
Yeah.
Related to what Lynne was saying there, which I think is a good piece of advice. I think Lynne said it just sort of in the middle, and it's not just apropos children's books, it's just about generally writing for the public. I mean, I think one of the hardest things academics have to learn is to translate academic prose into, say, journalism when they're writing. Talking's easier, I hope, you know, getting the training to do that, I think, would be really valuable, whether that's through the conversation or whatever university offers. I was lucky in that I was given an opportunity to write for a foreign newspaper, and they said, we'll edit you. So they kind of train you how to do it. You don't have to be a journalist. You just have to know that you can't cut and paste your academic work. And I've since set up a website to try and do the same thing. On an interest of mine, and the hardest work to get into public format is my academic friends, because you know they're sticking footnotes and whatnot, and we're like, no, delete. No one wants a footnote, right? So the sooner you can learn to sort of do your academic writing but have a sideline in almost blogging. You know, if you blog, it's good practice. Will help you to try and also engineer engagement opportunities. And I don't think it's a million miles away from what Lynne's just described. You just have a few more words, but probably the level's the same.
Yes, I'd always recommend writing for the conversation. They're quite good, and the media pick up on things there, and it really trains you, the conversation, to write the way you want, and it gives you very good editorial support and control. So it's not like writing for a newspaper where you find that they stuff an inappropriate photograph or headline on it, and then you feel deeply embarrassed about your public communication.
Yeah, interestingly, I think that writing for the general public has improved my scientific writing, because English is probably the most wonderful language for writing science, because we have so many words to describe the minutest little nuanced differences, and we can write in a fairly short space. And I used to write using all sorts of appropriate what I thought were appropriate words, the English word to use. But of course, many of readers around the world, I know it's one of the most widely spoken languages in the world, but many people, English is not their first language. And so all these clever words that I thought I was clever using were not clever at all, because people don't know what you're talking about, basically. So my scientific writing is better now, because I think it's much simpler. And I realised that I'm writing for non-native English speakers. So I think that was an important lesson that I learned.
A couple of questions I'd like to come to. Just before I do, I know some people are having to leave on the hour, so do notice that in the chat there's a link to a kind of feedback survey, and it's always very helpful for the Learned Society of Wales to have ideas about how you experience this and what you want for the future. So do click on the link if you're leaving, and be sure to fill that in. There's a question about a Marmite project, and if you've ever had to talk about a Marmite subject, I'll ask the questioner to raise that question so she can explain what she means by a Marmite subject. I'm very intrigued. And then I also can see in the chat there's some really interesting discussion where people are building in engagement as they develop research, for example, around clinical trials. So I'd like to come to both of you and ask you about using engagement at the very, very early stages of research, as well as development later on, and whether you've done any of that, because I can see some lovely ideas being exchanged in the chat. And of course, many ECRs, when they bring in money, have to give their pathway to impact and how they will involve people in early stages. And maybe we haven't touched on this yet. So Wendy, Marmite, tell us about Marmite.
Okay, so I work in I describe as a technically challenging area. I'm an engineer. So I work in engineering. I'm attached to the Nuclear Futures Institute at Bangor University, and I work in the nuclear fusion area, which is different from the nuclear fission area. So historically, all the nuclear plants around the world are nuclear fission plant. Nuclear fusion is something quite different. The hazards associated with nuclear fusion is very different, is much lower risk. There's virtually no radioactive materials produced. It's almost like a totally different subject area, but because nuclear fission has this history of nuclear accidents, when you first start talking, when people see the word nuclear, they have a sort of pre-perception in their mind that some people that it's a bad thing. So my question is really about, you know, if you've had to present in a subject area which has got maybe a bit contentious taint to it, that might have been tainted in the past, that's not related, perhaps not related to the work that you're doing now. And yeah, just how to deal with presentation about something which people may either really like or really hate. You know, that type of impression.
That's a really good question, and I sort of been doing that forever with very limited success. Because I think that fungi are perceived in that sort of way, but probably nowhere near as badly as that instant terror that people get from thinking about nuclear fission. I think fungi, people in this country are mycophobes.
Phobic, yeah.
They think that fungi are bad and everything they do is bad. And I think I've spent 40 years trying to drip away at that. And point out, yes, that there are some fungi which are bad, but we wouldn't be here without them, basically. And then I felt that I'd really, a few years ago, I thought I've got this. The people are on our side at long last. And then came ash dieback disease, and we were back almost to square one.
Right. Yes.
But yeah, I appreciate your difficulty. I mean, you need a slogan, don't you? Fusion isn't fission. I don't know, some clever thing to get people knowing straight away you're not talking about the thing that they perceive as the baddie.
Yeah.
I've got a suggestion on that, and hello colleague, probably never met, but no, as soon as you said nuclear, I just thought Chernobyl, the TV series, and now I want to speak to you because you know, and it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. You can peg to something popular. I mean, that TV series made me go read a whole bunch of history books about it. I mean, I probably don't start off automatically thinking nuclear is bad, so I'm maybe not the person you're referring to. But you know, that generated such interest at the time that if there's something you can peg it to that has been popular, and that's part of the way in. Unfortunately, because of the Jewish dimension of my work, it is a Marmite topic. So to be brutally honest, if you're going to start talking about Stanley Kubrick as Jewish, people love it or hate it or don't care. and it takes me into territory which, if you read the recent news, you know, is deeply uncomfortable, and for me, because of how an audience might potentially respond to it. There was a very early question in the chat, and I'll just bring it in here about trolls and whatnot. Is you know, my attitude has been, look, if you're going to dip your feet into social media, then you've got to, unfortunately, it's not right that I have to say this, it's utterly wrong. You either have to not go in there at all, or you have to go in holding your nose, because it gets into horrible places where obviously, because I'm Jewish and I do Jewish research, it can just lead into blatant anti-Semitism, or a kind of indifferent, a sort of diffident anti-Semitism of where your subject isn't given the sort of same respect or talked about in the same ways as others might be. You'd know it when you hear it, but other people might miss it, sort of thing. So that has been my experience, and I've had to deal with, and this sort of just to fold in what someone else asked earlier, yes, I've had to deal with trolls, and you know, I try doing, I suppose, sea lining is what they call it, you know, innocent civil questions back to tease out their prejudice, and that might be their prejudice about nuclear in your instance, and here it might be just prejudice. I always consistently engaged in civil debate on social media. You know, it's the only way to do it if you're going to go there. You know, I mean, I suppose it's a whole different discussion, but that's the problem with social media, is of what can happen when you're on there. So that was in response also to an earlier question. But I think with nuclear, definitely, you know, I don't know what the next TV series would be, but or we could do representations of nuclear on film, would get public interest.
I just saw shoot into the chat. Some Matt Manon said that perhaps this is where you need to collaborating with artists here. Maybe you need to consult a PR firm, get a PR firm on board and tell you how to do that. I don't know.
Noted down. Thank you both.
Well, I've learned something from the chat there. I didn't know that about NMR-MRI.
I can see some nascent collaborations possibly coming out of this, partly between the people on the chat and partly between people who've spoken. It's a very nice outcome from an event like this.
On that note, Jenny, one of the most interesting talks I ever heard was someone at Aberystwyth who researches sonnets team up with people who research fields to go look for a field in a Shakespearean sonnet. And, you know, so teaming up with people who have got absolutely nothing to do with your discipline, but finding that thing in the middle, not what you can do for me. I hate that. Like when people hear I teach film studies, like, can you film, you know, if Lynne could be, could you film my mushrooms for me? I was like, well, I don't film, and what's in it for me? Nothing. But if out of this, you know, I'm really interested in what we'd call the semiotics of mushrooms. You know, what are the cultural values of mushrooms? Not the health, you know, not even the culinary, but mushrooms. You know, Nazis used mushrooms to say negative things about Jews, right? Could we come up with a project together where we explore that, where I use my expertise, Lynne uses hers, and we work on something that neither of us had thought of doing in the first place? That's what I recommend to people when it comes to this kind of thing. Not that what can you do for me approach, which I think is more exploitative with reference to the question earlier, but where can you meet in the middle to find something of mutual interest that neither of you had really thought of in the first place?
That's the creative synergies where you're meeting equally and often starting with a lot of brainstorming, and the most creative projects can come out of that. Frederick, I do ask if you feel your question about trolls hasn't been answered. Feel free to just butt in or ask your question. But I felt Nathan answered that in a really kind of interesting way that was thought-provoking for me. Yeah, the mute button is your friend as well. I guess that. And I think, yeah, I've sometimes said, you know, if I had to get into an argument with my partner where we could only say sentences that were 25 words long, we'd very quickly argue and get really, really angry with each other. And Twitter is not a good place to have an argument. So I think courteous questioning or disagreement works, and the mute button, and if necessary, report to Twitter for what it's worth.
What's interesting on that note, sorry, just as you were talking, is if you're familiar with David Baddiel's book that's just come out, Jews Don't Count, it's largely based on his Twitter interactions. So in a sense, you've got a research project in the making, particularly if you do, you know, I know at Cardiff they have projects in exploring precisely that. But, you know, one day I'm thinking of doing why it is people, and this refers to Wendy's Marmite topic, why is it people react with such kind of venom and end up blocking me? Because I have the gall to suggest that Stanley Kubrick was Jewish, which he was. So now I'm thinking of a research project in exploring these responses. You know, why do people take such objection to just stating what is a fact? I think I have the answer, but it's, you know, depending on how far you want to go in there, you know, and Jenny, you asked earlier about building engagement into your projects. One can go in there thinking could lead to one, not one that I'd thought of, might not, and it might not be pleasant. I mean, but you know, potentially there is also research material in there through that engagement.
Yes, yes. And I think that's one of the challenges of impact and engagement, in that it always generates more work because it generates such interesting questions, which I guess is why I asked the question early on about navigating between enthusiasm and exhaustion. Okay, now let me see. Have I missed questions? We've got another 5 minutes, so please type in your question, or at this stage, if you just want to turn on your microphone and ask it, and your camera ideally, please feel free while I skim through any outstanding questions here. Or Tia, if you can see I've missed anything with my multitasking, please let me know. And Lynne, have you done much evolution of using engagement early on in your work? Or with science, is that harder because the science is the science?
Right, I'm not quite sure what you mean there, Jenny. Evolution. How do you mean evolution? Do you mean?
I'm probably not using it in a scientifically correct term. The development of, I just mean, for example, when I was starting out in my work around patients in long-term vegetative states, I started by having a round table at the Wellcome Trust, and I had scientists and lawyers and family members and ethicists and philosophers, and we had a really good lunch and a really good talk, and I got insight into different perspectives and what they thought the important questions were, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that most of my engagement has been not so much propagating the information that I have found personally, but trying to spread a general message. So at a much more simple level, I think, than that. So that hasn't answered your question at all.
Well, no, it has. It's just, it's different. You know, we each, I guess, have a different approach. I was intrigued by the question about method and thinking how, yes, when you put in a grant application now, you have your engagement method, you know, pathway to impact. And I never had anything like that. I had things scrawled on the back of the envelope, and it was more like scattering wildflowers, and some grew surprisingly sturdy and some wilted. And I never knew which, and it was a bit more chaotic, I guess. And I'm not sure I could write a pathway to impact document now.
No, I yes, okay, I understand exactly what you're saying now. Yeah. So yes, so for pathways to impact, I think you do have to think very carefully about how you would spread the information that you are finding. And I think it varies so much from project to project, doesn't it? And but I think you have to put yourself in the places in the position of the people who need to know that information. So not think what you want to do, but think how they would be best receiving it.
Yes, and I think diversity of audience as well. I think we sometimes just think of an audience as separate. And I think, as both of you were speaking, you talked about addressing policymakers or children or different kinds of public. And I think that's probably a really key element of any public engagement.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because I think that I do address lots of different people, but I think it really is horses for courses. and you tailor what you're doing for one group, which would be very different from what it might be for another group of people. And I think that that's absolutely crucial in any sort of outreach or engagement. Think about the group that you're trying to get your message across to, and how best they can receive it and understand it.
And there's a very good question here just come up. Do you want to ask this question about digital exclusion, which of course with COVID has become really interesting. I think on the whole, we so much rely on digital outreach now, which is great for people trapped in their homes. So it's challenged some kinds of exclusion, but it's maybe introduced another. So would you like to ask that question?
Yeah, it was just kind of potentially outside this audience, because the people I'm trying to engage with aren't necessarily academic, but I was just wondering, in light of COVID and the work you're doing, how you engage with those that are digitally excluded or don't have access to Twitter or social media.
Very good question.
Can I come in with that and respond to the previous question? One of the other things I do is local history. I mean, I'm interested in local Jewish history. It's about building an engagement at the beginning, and it will answer your question, Hal, which is that, you know, when you're doing local history, everything around you is a resource. So, you know, artifacts, buildings, streets, people. So you need to reach them to try and get material, which might be their memories. It might be they have photos. I mean, the stuff I do is about local history, so it's even down to things like, have you got old receipts or shopping bags? I'd love those. So you do need to engage in audiences who typically, or stereotypically, should I put, or at least pre-pandemic, weren't as, you know, perhaps as digitally adept as they might be now. So the question, it's difficult now because in pandemic terms, kind of, you know, that's a different level of obstacle. But pre-pandemic, one of the reasons why we developed this like physical paper map, right, which I can send to people, is because we knew people aren't going to download an app. But what this came about was talking to people, doing memory sessions, doing local history talks, building that into the research. As you know, you didn't necessarily disseminate the research at the end, right? That's another mistake in certain projects. It's different, I suppose, from science. You disseminate the research as you're doing it to say, look, I don't know the answers to these questions. Can you help me out here? And we did it old-fashioned routes, newspapers, radio, talks in local history societies, walks. This project's called Walking Jewish History because of the health benefits as well, where we walk around. I know that presents its own challenges as well, different to digital ones. But those were some of the routes we used to build engagement in, to facilitate the research, but then to be able to disseminate it. That included an audience that perhaps pre-pandemic wasn't the, I'm trying to put this politely, how would we put this? You know what I'm saying? You wouldn't associate it as being the most digitally adept at that time. Now they might be, but I can't answer the question, I think, now of how we reach digitally excluded audiences when we can only use digital. That's a really, you know, maybe you have an answer. That's quite challenging, isn't it? Because we're not meant to go around. Right?
Yeah. I fear that I have been digitally exclusive since the pandemic. Although in saying that, I mean, I think things like radio, I have done several radio programs and pieces in newspapers. But outside of pandemic times, I really don't want to be digital. I want to be face to face with people whenever I can. Now, I've already said that, yeah, it's great being on television and radio because you can get to millions of people, and you can. But one of the great joys to me is actually talking to people face to face. And this is very often not just in a lecture room. See, this is wonderful that we can talk by Zoom, but you really can't get the feedback. It's very hard to be a wonderful speaker in front of a very blank screen, because I think this, like actors, you feed back. If you give a good talk, I think it's not you that gives a good talk, it's you're getting the vibes from the people to whom you're speaking. So I like to do live things. So normally I really do try to be as inclusive as possible, and not just to do things in halls. I think to do things as an ecologist, I can do things outside, and that is wonderful, going around taking people outside and showing them things and discovering things there and then. But I think that you're right. During the pandemic, I have not been able to do that, and I'm not quite sure if I could have done things differently or not.
I think it's so important to think about who's excluded in whatever medium we're working from. So I took some public engagement work into care homes, and they'd never been seen as the public. They're in a care home, they get excluded. So I think we need to think about it from the point of view of diversity and inclusion. And each medium will have advantages and disadvantages. But I'm also reminded by both what Lynne and Nathan has said about, you're global stars, but you work with the local. You want to connect with people face to face. You do the local map. You do the walk around your local area. And I think that fuels everybody who does really important engagement work, or most of us. We don't want to just be on the big screen talking to anonymous millions. We want the dialogue, and we want to keep connection. And I would say for anyone who's starting out with public engagement, go local, go connected, go with the people you're going to feel comfortable with developing that as you build your skills